Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Bean, and I'm joined by Chris Kent. Hello, Mr. Kent.
Hello, sir.
Today, we're going to continue our talk about testing our students. Last time we went over the process of the test. Today, we're going to take a look at notes that you can take, or that I think you probably should take at your belt testing, and then what to do with those notes moving forward and how that should impact your students. Use your belt testing not only as a time to grade your students, but also as an opportunity to check your teaching progress. If you find at a belt test that the majority of the students are having the same issue or doing the same move wrong across the board, then you need to realize that is a teaching error. As you're grading their performance, evaluate what you would like to see next time across not only that group, but across the whole of all of your students. See what they are now and see where you would like them to be at next time. And think about a process, some ideas, some steps to take to get them to that next step. Could they have better stances? Are their kicks low? Could they be higher, or do they need to be lower? Could they have better intensity? And then again, use those as goals to improve upon for the next round of testing. I like to do this at nearly all the belt tests that we have. I like to have something I'm taking notes on, and then as we're testing the students, I use that again as a check-in, not only just for the students, but for us, the instructors, and then almost like a progress check. Okay, I get to see them every 3 months. Okay, I see them every 3 months, and as those 3 months progress, of course, I want to see those students perform better and do better on their moves. But also, this is a time to check in and see, okay, they seem to be doing this move incorrectly. And it's not just one or two students, it's like everybody that's that belt. And so for us, then that gives me an opportunity to go back to the person who is in charge of that belt rank and ask them, hey, listen, how do you teach this move? What's going on in your classes so that we can try to figure out how to correct that moving forward. One of the major times that this was an issue is at one of our advanced class testings. We have a set of 6 joint locks, and each one of those have takedowns. We would often struggle to get the students to learn the moves in time for testing, and because of this, they would perform them poorly on testing. So there was almost just like there was too much information for them to retain in that testing time. Or the process for teaching it wasn't quite there, or maybe the moves were just too hard to do at the level that they were. One idea, one option, one step that we took to rectify that was we took that information and we kind of spread it out a little bit more. So instead of learning, 3 at this belt and 3 at this belt, and then you do the takedowns for the first 3 and then the takedowns for the last 3, we spread those out a little bit and made it a little bit longer of a process to learn those 6 joint locks and then the takedowns that go along with those. The thought behind this is that they would have more time to practice those things. They would have less information to do, so they should be better at it by the time they go for their tests, and then by the time they do their black belt test and so on. It's all information they have, they know, they understand, they can do well. While this helped some of the students, it still seemed that these 6 joint locks were an issue. They were having struggles learning it and then being able to perform it at their belt test. So I came up with an idea to fix this. And what we did was we made a form based on those 6 joint locks. See, the joint locks, they transition. You do 1, and then you move into 2, and then 3, and so on. And so it's a path. You start at 1, and then if you don't get the takedown for 1, then you move to 2. And then in the process from fighting, the opponent's trying to fight out of 2, they move into 3, and so on, all the way 1 through 6. It's a path. And so thinking about how to implement a way that the students could pick up that path and do that a little bit better, we came up with a form. And so the form is the path, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you do it in the air as if somebody is standing in front of you. There just isn't anybody there. And the benefit for this is we started teaching that form a full belt before they needed to know any of those joint locks. And so they had about 2.5, 3 months to learn and work on that form before they were introduced to the joint locks that were associated with that form. Having this new form, again, allowed them to do these moves without a partner. It also allowed them an opportunity to see what it's like to practice these moves without a partner at home. So often is the time, I'm sure you guys have heard this as well as we have, I don't know how to practice this because I can't do this with mom or dad or brother or sister or whoever at home. I don't have anybody to do this with, especially for self-defense moves. That can be a challenge. So with this, that took that out of the equation altogether because it's a form. You can do a form, in the car ride on the way here if you needed to as an extra practice. You can do it at home. You don't have to have somebody there that you're doing these moves on. And so that, I think, was a huge benefit. The second part to this was it seemed like when those students were struggling to do these 6 moves at the test, it wasn't necessarily their upper body, their hand movements that were the issue. It was their footwork. And for these set of moves, their footwork needed to be there and had to be precise and follow through and do the moves that they were supposed to do. But it all had to stem from the footwork, because if the footwork wasn't there, the upper body didn't matter as much because they weren't able to control their opponent's body. So by making this a form, it put the focus on the footwork because they could move their feet through the motion in the path that they should be moving in, so that when it came time to put a person in front of them, their footwork was already there. They've already been practicing it. And so not only did that give them an opportunity to practice it in a situation where they didn't have somebody standing right in front of them, they didn't have to have a partner to do this, but it gave them a full 3 more months to do these moves. It gave them an opportunity to do the steps and the footwork for these moves. And then when it came time to introduce the moves, we found that instead of only teaching 3 moves at a time, because they already knew the breakdown, the path for the moves, we could teach all 6. And then they could do all 6. It was a very easy transition. So they did the form that was implemented the belt prior. They tested on that. They did great. Then it came time for them to learn the actual joint locks. Well, doing that form with a person in front of them is a awfully easy thing for them to do because they've already been doing these moves. So they just have a person in front. Sure, there's a little bit of tweaks that have to be made because there's a physical person that they're grabbing onto, but that was a very easy transition. So instead of only teaching 3 moves at that next belt level, we found that we could do all 6. And they could do all 6 and at a relatively good level, much better than previous, so that by the time they did their belt tests on that, they were fine. And then as they moved in, they did their first 3 takedowns, and they did the next 3 takedowns. So they actually ended up doing these moves in a shorter time span because of that form that was implemented. Now, the benefit to having that as a form is every time in class when we do forms, we do that form. We don't have time always to do those 6 joint locks with a partner, but nearly every class, if not once a week, we do all of their forms. And so they're either getting practice on their form, doing it in a solo type fashion, or they're getting it practice on a person in a self-defense type situation. Do you have anything to add to the time that we added that form in?
And without taking notes at the test or taking time to evaluate those things when it was appropriate, I don't think we would have noticed that issue, and we wouldn't have been able to gone back and make these changes and make these corrections. And the nice thing as you're talking about this is we stress the ability to not only practice it in the air, but then they also have a way to practice it when they go home. Because like you said, sometimes these partner type drills are not easy to do if you don't have a partner. But making this set of moves into a form makes it easier for them to go home and practice it and then be able to do it on their own and get the repetition into their bodies used to taking those steps and making those moves and doing those techniques. So The way that this relates to the note taking is the fact that you identified that problem and saw it was an issue, and then you were able to take the notes that you gathered from a test and then go back to correct or develop a system to deal with that issue. And so, had we not been taking notes, I imagine for many more tests afterward, we would have just been confused or upset or perplexed as to why no one was understanding this.
Or
But
frustrated at the students.
yes, yeah, frustrated they didn't know what they were doing. But having this note taking process and noticing this trend gave us an ability to address that. And I would say, in the time since you created that form, those joint locks have vastly improved with the combination of doing them earlier and doing them more systematically in a better way before they get to the partner type exercise. So I think it's been a huge benefit to us, again, that we would not maybe have addressed had we not been so diligent in note taking.
Another reason, taking notes at your test can be beneficial is, of course, like we talked about, you're not the only one on the floor teaching all of the students. And so if you have an entire belt group of students that are behind or don't quite know the information that they're supposed to know, hopefully you have one person that's in charge of that belt group. You can go to them and talk about what happened. What did you see? How are you teaching these moves? And what are some things you can do to improve that situation moving forward? A part of that is when you are in your classes, it's important to have one instructor with each belt group for the entire testing cycle. If they're always switching out, that can be tough for a couple of reasons. Number one, if Master Kent teaches a group and the lesson plans says, get through section A for this form today, and he gets through almost all of section A, but not quite because we ran out of time or we lost power, we had to cut class early, something happened, right? We didn't quite get all the information in like we're supposed to. I don't think that's ever happened. That's a funny situation.
No, I remember 2 years ago it happened.
Oh.
Do you remember we had the flashlights out on the floor? It was during the first one or two classes of the night.
Yeah, it was the little ninjas and then beginners.
And in the 10 years I've been teaching or what it is, that's the only time I remember that happening.
It did. Yeah, we had flashlights out on the ground and they were kind of shining, so they had a little bit of light so we could teach class. But the students' focus was not quite on paying attention to what was going on in class.
We were also pretty lucky. It was earlier in the night, so we still had the sunlight coming in as well, which helped. But it was interesting, and I would argue not only the students' focus was diminished, but my own was, because it's such a novel experience to be here with the power off doing martial arts in the dark.
And not only that, but we were trying to figure out when is it going to come on and what can we do to help to facilitate to do this better. So all that to say is things happen and we don't always get to follow through with what the lesson plan says every single time to the T. And in that situation, if another instructor comes in and goes to teach that group of students, they don't know exactly what happened last time. They don't know exactly what their students are supposed to be doing or what they're supposed to look like or those key things that we talked about last time to improve upon. So if you have somebody else teaching each and every time, that makes it difficult, one, from the instructor standpoint, because they have to try to learn the students and kind of remember where they were and how to interact with them a little better. But if you have one instructor with them the whole time, or at least for that belt cycle, then they build a rapport with those students. They can remember the information they taught them and had them work on for the previous class, and then they can build upon that for the next time. So as a side note, I would say it is beneficial to have one instructor in charge of one belt group for the entire testing cycle. And again, when that happens at belt testing, that's an opportunity, one, to be testing your students, but also to be a progress check for that instructor. You can say, okay, listen, now I'm testing your students. Let's see how they do. Let's see if they have any issues. And then if they have issues, if it's across the board, if everybody has the same or very similar issues, that's an instructional issue or an instructional problem that you will need to step in and try to rectify.
We talked previously about being consistent when you were teaching, and this just goes back to that idea of having the same person doing the same group, and even if it's not for the whole week. So, for example, I'll do a certain belt group. I'll do the green belts on Monday and Wednesday. Someone else does them on Tuesday and Thursday. But the consistency there is that I'm always doing it Monday, Wednesday, and the other person's always doing it Tuesday, Thursday. It's not switched around within those different classes. So, like you said, it gives us a chance to kind of be able to have that one person interacting with them the whole time and understanding how they work and understanding where they are, because as you said, things happen and it doesn't always go the way we want, and sometimes we don't get through the material we wanted to, or other things happen. Well, that person will know where their group is at because they were with them last time. But if I'm with them on Monday and we only get 70% of our information done, someone else comes in on Wednesday and they don't know what we did on Monday. They're going to be frustrated. They don't know that extra 30% when really they never got to it. So it's not their fault, it's ours. So being consistent with that will help us to get through the material. But then, if there is an issue, you're able to go to that person that did that group. So let's say, for example, these green belts don't know, they just missed an entire hand technique. Well, rather than go through the 6 different instructors and say, hey, what happened? Hey, what happened? Hey, what happened? We say,
did you have these guys on this day? Did you have these guys on this day? Was it you? Or who was this?
Yeah, we can know where we are, what belt it is, and we know exactly who is in charge. So rather than attacking that whole group, because then if it was one kid or one student that didn't know a move, okay, maybe that one student fell behind. But when that whole entire group is failing in this one category, there's obviously a bigger issue than them just not practicing or knowing the material. There's a disconnect somewhere. So it gives us the ability to go back to that specific person, not have to do some investigation, at least into who worked with them. We investigate the issue, but then we know exactly who to go to figure that problem out.
So now that you have your notes, your list of objectives to try to complete for this next round of belt testing, what do you do with those notes? You can set out on a mission to try to fix all of them all at one time. Okay, you see this happen, okay, let's fix this. You see this happen, you try to fix this. You see this happen, you try to fix this. And that is a way to go about that. I would suggest a different route. Once you have that list of notes, let's say you have 5 things on that notes, on the notes for that test. So the beginner's class, I got 5 notes, 5 objectives that I want to try to fix and improve for the next round of teaching. Go through that list and prioritize the most important thing, and then the second most, make it a priority list, okay? And then while you're going through that, think about, okay, if I help to improve this one area, how much overflow will that have into the next area? It's the exact same thing like we talked about when we're correcting our students. We want to correct the highest priority thing, and then hopefully that thing has the most overflow into the next, and then overflow into the next, and so on down the list. This is right up that same alley. Prioritize your list in such a way that you fix the most important thing. And again, hopefully that will have the most impact on the next, and then so on and so on all the way across the board. So you have that list of 5 things. Discipline while waiting for it to be their turn. Their self-defense lacked intensity. They only responded yes, sir, or no, sir, or yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am, when a particular instructor was talking to them. Everyone made the same mistake in their form, and one of their techniques, the sidekick specifically, was not quite up to par. So there's my list, right? There's my 5 different points that I want to improve upon for next time. So now let's go through that list and we'll kind of break those down and talk about the priority that I gave each of those. So priority number 1 is their self-defense lacked intensity. I chose to put that at the very top because if their self-defense lacks intensity, that's kind of an issue. We're here to do martial arts. Martial arts is a lot about defending yourself. If you can't actively defend yourself in a situation, that can be a concern. And so moving that to the top of the list, I think did a couple things. Number one is it made sure they can actually defend themselves if and when the time was needed. On top of that, if their intensity was lacking in their self-defense, that means that their intensity for their hand techniques or foot techniques in other areas of their test perhaps also was lacking. And so hopefully bringing that intensity up in that area will help to overflow and bring the intensity up in other areas as well. The next point on my list, step number 2, is they only responded yes, sir, when a specific instructor was talking to them. That is a discipline issue. And it is interesting that that happened only when one instructor was talking to them. So that means that that person in the student's eyes has their respect, but maybe not so much for the other ones. And so that again is another issue. And I put that at the second the list because discipline that's another foundational pinpoint for martial arts. And so having their discipline in line, I think, is important. Next one was everybody made the same mistake in their form. We talked about that a little bit already, but everybody across the board, all of the green belts, made this one mistake. I'm using green belts not because Master Kent teaches the green belts, but just that's the belt, the color that I said. But anyways, all of this one belt level made the same mistake in their form. Next one was their discipline was not very good while they are waiting for it to be their turn. Okay, again, discipline, again. Now, and as a side note for that, I think if we work on that yes, sir discipline from the second step, then that will increase the discipline overall, and that would help to alleviate issue number 4, which is discipline waiting for it to be their turn. And then number 5, again, is their technique for that side kick was not quite up to par. And so once I have that prioritized list, I will make some guidelines, some paths to follow to help to improve some of those situations, some of those steps on the prioritized improvement list. That's a mouthful. So for item number 1, we can tell this, and again, item number 1 is their self-defense lacked intensity. So for item number 1, telling the students they need to perform a particular self-defense at high intensity. And give them the background, the understanding of why that's important. Because if they get grabbed outside of here and they defend themselves like they did on the test, they're not going to be defending themselves. It's not going to work. These moves are made to be done so that you can actually defend yourself. But if you don't do it at high intensity, if you don't have the technique behind what you're doing, they're not going to work. And so sharing that with them, giving them examples for that so they can see the difference between something that would actually defend themselves and clearly what would not defend themselves. Another tool that we've used in the past is the set a timer. So what we'll do is we'll have them, let's use front choke, for example. We'll have the attacker grab the student for a front choke. Okay, listen, I'll set a timer. You got 7 seconds to defend yourself. Ready? Go! And then timer goes, boop! And if they're done at the end of that 7 seconds, that means they went a little quicker. Hopefully their intensity was a little higher. At the very least, they were more rapid as they did that. And oftentimes, if I do a punch like this, it's not very intense. And for the audio only, I'm punching very slowly. And if I did a punch very quickly, that's going to have more intensity, more power behind it because it was a quicker movement. And so by increasing their speed in that situation, we have found has increased their output of intensity as well. Not to mention, if somebody grabs you for a front choke, again, for example, you don't have 45 seconds, a minute and a half to get away from that person because that's too long. That's too long of a fight. If you're fighting for that long, you're going to run out of energy. And so the quicker you can detach from that situation in a safe manner, the easier and better that's going to be for the students. Now that you've implemented some corrective measures to help that situation, then it's time to go back and check, right? So give We talked about last time giving the students a pop quiz as a belt test, probably not the best situation or best idea, but in this situation, give them a pop quiz. Say, okay, let's see your self-defense. Let's see you do it like you're doing it with some intensity, some purpose, some power behind it. Go! And then inspect what you expect, right? Give them an opportunity to demonstrate that and then see if you're on track where you need to be at or where you would like to be at moving forward. And then if so, you can check that item off the list. If not, then go back and try to think of some different ideas, some different techniques, some different drills to use on the teaching floor to get you to where you want them to be at, or get them to where you want them to be at to complete that goal. As you go through this list, you may find that fixing one area will help to improve or completely fix another area on your list as well. For the next item, not saying yes, sir, yes, ma'am, is a discipline issue. There's another discipline issue on the list that I put a little further down because I know that working on one area of discipline, again, will help to improve the other area as well. So working on that yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, or no, sir, or no, ma'am, whatever your response is from your students in that discipline type fashion will, again, increase their focus of their discipline. Increasing their focus of discipline in this area, again, will hopefully help to spill over into another area that we have a little bit further down on the list as well.
One thing I've noticed about this too is as instructors, we need to make sure that we are requiring that from our students. So for example, if they don't do it and we don't crack down on them, not destroy them, maybe crack down is a harsh way to say that, but if we don't remind them to be saying yes sir, or yes ma'am, or however you want them to respond to you, if we don't remind them, then they're going to keep getting away with it. So in those situations, it's worth the extra second to have to remind them or to get them to say that, because that's only going to help reinforce that habit. So yes, it is a discipline issue, but not entirely of their own, in the sense that if we don't get on them for not saying it, they're going to continue not to say it because there's no consequence or repercussion, or however you want to think about it, for not doing that thing. So as instructors, if that's something that we expect from them, we need to make sure we do require it from them, and then not get upset if we aren't pushing it. Now on the same side, if the whole rest of the class is saying it and that one person isn't, or we never, ever, ever remind them to say it, then maybe that's not our issue, or their issue, Maybe it's something we need to be more strict about. So just a side note about that, and part of that discipline issue is that if we aren't staying current or being on top of those issues, then they're going to keep happening, and maybe you should be more frustrated at yourself because you're not adequately dealing with that situation.
Yes, sir. So moving to the next item on your list, which is the green belts did all of this move wrong in their form or hand technique or whatever it is, but they did this move completely wrong. And so we talked a little bit about that, but that means that likely is a instruction issue. So you find the person that was in charge of that belt group and say, hey, listen, show me these moves. And if they're not doing it, if they're not making that mistake, then that means that the next question that you would ask is, okay, teach me how to do these moves. And one of those two things will be off. Either they will be doing the move not correctly, or they will be instructing or teaching the move not correctly. Because if everybody in that belt group is doing the move the same way and it's wrong, and this one person is in charge of them, it's clear to see that's an issue, right? So either that person is doing the move wrong, or they're explaining it or teaching it incorrectly. And so in those situations, and of course, this is not done in front of the students. We talked about this before. You don't want to correct the instructor in front of the students because that will take their respect level down in the eyes of the students. If they think that they can't do this right, then what else are they not doing right? We've talked about this already. So you can see you can see where that could be an issue. So figure out how and where and when to do this. But then you need to correct the instructor. And then once you've corrected that instructor, they can do the move correctly, they can teach the move correctly, and it's in line with what you would like them to be doing. Then at the next belt cycle, if that isn't an issue anymore, great, problem's done. Well, kind of. Because see, that new group of green belts has that problem fixed. But the group of green belts that now are not green belts anymore, provided they pass their test, need to be fixed on that issue. So then you need to go to that person who teaches the next belt group after green belts. For us, it's green belts with white stripe. You would say, hey, listen, this is what I saw at their belt test. We need to make sure we fix this moving forward. And, of course, do all the things they need to do for their new belt level. And in that situation, I talked about if they pass their test. In that situation, if you have an entire belt group, again, all the green belts, they do this movement in their form wrong, providing everything else was fine, I don't agree with failing them in that situation because it's not their fault. If they all do the move wrong and they all do it the same wrong and it's all of them and one person is in charge of teaching that group, then you can't fault the students for that situation because it's not their fault for doing it wrong. They were taught wrong. They were taught incorrectly. So in that situation, providing everything else is fine, everything else is in line with where it needs to be at, pass them, move them on to the next level, and then fix that issue not only for those students, but also for that instructor so that isn't an issue moving forward. Again, you can't hold the students back because the instructor failed to teach the information correctly. So moving on to the next item on the list was discipline while the students are waiting for it to be their turn. This is, again, something we talked about already with discipline, saying yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, all those, whatever your discipline responses for your students, having that discipline focus improvement in class, meaning you are focused on their discipline, not only with the terms and phrases that they're saying, but that will spill over to other areas as well. So while the students are in class waiting for it to be their turn, you knew that was an issue on the test. So while they're in class waiting for it to be their turn, use that as an opportunity to fix that. Hey, listen, while you guys are waiting for it to be your turn, I need you to stand, stand at attention or stand with your hands on your back or don't be moving. It's not time to talk or don't lean, whatever it is that they were doing incorrect at the test. Fix that in class. And again, that should be a continual thing, right? Now that you see that that's an issue, the odds of them doing it in class are also very high, if not higher than they would be at a belt test. So let the students know what you expect of them, and then they can do those things. The last item on the list was that sloppy side kick, and I chose side kick just because that's a awfully challenging technique, I believe, to do correctly. This is, again, one of those things that wasn't necessarily taught incorrectly. It just is a challenge to do that movement correctly. It wasn't that all of the students did the same mistake. Just across the board, 50% or 75% of them didn't quite have an excellent side kick. Maybe 25 or so percent of them, 15% did pretty good, but they still could be improved. And again, I chose this technique because it's a difficult move to do correctly. So think about some strategic ways to work on, give the students more time in class to improve on that kick. And the chances of them improving on that kick with work, and then that improvement carrying over to other areas of their kicks, other footwork that they're doing, will be increased as well. Give the students time in class to do those things. Come up with some ways. Okay, listen, here's a different drill for a side kick. Have them do balanced side kicks. Have them, kick this pad on a side kick. Have them do, whatever different versions of the side kick that you want, but give them more time in class to improve and work on those things. And then let your team know, hey, listen, this is what I saw last time. Their side kick, I think, could be better. And these are some different tools that I want to use to improve that. And then letting your team know that. And then when your students are in class, team, your instructors already know, hey, listen, we want the students to be proven on their Sidekick, and so these are the things we're going to do. You're going to give your students more time in class to work on that Sidekick. The instructors know that you want that Sidekick to be improved. There's your steps to take for that. And if it's not Sidekick, if it's low block or a front stance or whatever the technique is, those same situations, those same guidelines, I would say, apply to that.
Well, the same idea from earlier applies as well, where you work on that one thing that will most likely improve a lot of other things. So like you said, for the Sidekick, practicing your Sidekick, a more challenging kick, in theory should make some of the easier kicks even better, because as you're practicing that challenging material, it greatly improves the fundamentals and aspects of the other kicks that are already involved without having to do each kick. So we don't start at the bottom and work on each kick until we get to that hardest one. We work on the hardest one, which then in turn helps to improve all the ones that are below it as well. So that same idea of fixing the one issue that is present through all of the issues is going to help make working with the other issues even better. So whether it be a kick or a hard hand technique or just a difficult skill, not only will that one skill improve or one technique improve, but it's going to help improve all the other ones too.
Now, of course, your list of corrections, your list of improvements or goals for your students for the next belt cycle is going to be different than ours. The important thing is, as you are testing your students, use that as an opportunity to perform a progress check. Now that the students can perform that Sidekick correctly, adjust the lesson plans to accommodate that in the future. So if you worked on these drills in situations that you can add those drills to your lesson plan, add those to your lesson plan. Because then it isn't fixed just for right now, but it's a continual fix that will continue to be fixed and improved upon as new students go through those drills and techniques on the training floor. Of course, your list of corrections of goals of improvements for your students will be different than that list that I had as an example. The big part is, as you're at the belt testing, use that as a progress check, not only for yourself, for your team, but for the students, and have some goals for them and some steps to achieve those goals. That way, the next time you go to the belt testing, you're not seeing the same mistakes over and over again. And those mistakes, of course, will compile and be more and more because they're learning more and more information. So fix those things as you move forward. See this and this and this, and then fix those things. That way, when you go to the next belt testing, hopefully those mistakes are not present any longer. Sure, there likely will be other mistakes that'll be there. Fine, understood. But then fix those things. And then as you fix those things, as you find different drills to include in your classes, and you find that those work, add those to your lesson plan. That way, that fix isn't just for right now, but it's a continual fix. So that the next time, in a year's time, when you have green belts test again, that issue isn't there for them. It's fixed because you implemented those things in the lesson plan. Just like we implemented that form that we talked about in the beginning. Those 6 joint locks are now not an issue, right? We can move on and we can fix the next issue on our list or subsequent lists moving forward. And as we talked about with correcting your students, try to prioritize that list in such a way that fixing one thing will have some sort of impact in the next, and so on down the list, because that will be the best way to go about those corrections. Don't try to make all of the corrections all at one time. Understand that this is, be in it for the long game. And as such, fix this small thing, or maybe this medium-sized thing, and then fix this medium-sized thing. And then after all the medium-sized things are fixed, then you can go back and fix the small things. And after the small things are fixed, you get smaller and smaller and smaller with those things that you're fixing, that you're improving along the way.
And the reason it's important to do this every single test is so you have that gauge of how things are going, because you may have corrected an issue 6 months ago. Well, there's no guarantee that issue is still corrected or has been dealt with. So you want to be constantly reevaluating and looking at your program to identify those issues and continually working to improve them. And like you said, start with the biggest issues and work your way down. But I guess the whole reason I'm saying all of this is because it's not like you fix it once and it's done forever. Don't block it out of your mind and forget about it. Just like when you make adjustments to your lesson plan or your curriculum, you want to go back and check and make sure it's working and make sure those things are still effective and still helping you to be efficient on the teaching floor. So we're not saying also that you correct it one time and then it's done for. Keep looking at those things. Keep paying attention to what's happening. That way you know that things are still working well and going the way you want them to.
Yes, sir. Do you have anything to add on notes on teaching?
No, sir. I think we did a pretty good dive into taking notes and then implementing them to help make us all better.
And how can the listeners find us online? I'll let you do it this time because I didn't do so great last time.
Yes, sir. You can find us online. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram. On all those places, we're at MA Teaching Tactics. MA for Martial Arts Teaching Tactics. Again, that is MA Teaching Tactics.
Until next time, I'm Chris Bean.
And I'm Chris Kent.